Hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Coast Vue, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi such an amazing place to live, work, and play. Hope you're having a sort of a great holiday season as we barrel toward Christmas. And as I've said so many times on my show, leading up to today, always keep local merchants in mind. When you spend your money locally, you're literally casting a vote for the kind of communities you want. And coastal Mississippi is this collection of amazing communities, each with its own special sense of place. And usually it's the small business and the merchants in a community that are helping to create that wonderful sense of place. So keep that in mind. 80 cents on every dollar you spend locally stays in the local community. And it's those local merchants who are working so hard to work in the community with things like the homeless community, or they're the ones who are sponsoring the soccer teams and the softball teams. You know the story. Great time to be reminded of that, and I've tried to be focused on that as we go forward. Listen, if you look around, one of the most substantial things that happened after Hurricane Katrina was the work that we did with infrastructure. The infrastructure of coastal Mississippi was annihilated. Highway 90 had big issues. Our bridges had to be rebuilt. And you look back on it, and I think all of us got a great education in democracy. How do we want to rebuild these things? We had lots of conversations about that. What kind of bridges do we want? Lots of really dynamic conversations about that. But now we look back and you see these incredible bridges over Bay St. Louis, so from Biloxi to Ocean Springs, and you see, Beach Boulevard, and you think about the role that the Mississippi Department of Transportation played in helping coastal Mississippi come back. It is no less than dramatic, absolutely dramatic. And I'm really pleased today to have the director, the executive director of what we call MDOT, the Mississippi Department of Transportation, Brad White, to join me today. We're going to talk a little bit about MDOT for sure, but I really want to talk about Brad and where he came from. You're going to be surprised at the incredible leaders he's had the opportunity to work with and learn from during his career. But without any further ado, let me just say, welcome to Coast Vue, my friend.
Thank you, Ricky. I appreciate you having me.
Good. Listen, for people who are listening on the radio, of course, people who are watching on Facebook or YouTube see this, but I see that beautiful tree in the background. It's a great time of the year, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it sure is.
So what tell me about the Brad White family during Christmas.
Well, we're kind of spread out, but it's always a good time. We don't get to see one another as much as we'd like through the year, like a lot of families. So it's an opportunity that we start early in several days, getting together with my father and his brothers and cousins and stuff, my mother and my sisters and stepsisters and everybody. So we have a rather large family. So it's a good opportunity for everybody to get to spend some time with one another and catch up on lost time from the rest of the year.
Yeah, isn't that true? And a great time to reflect about how lucky we are to have such a wonderful, family and so many wonderful family members and friends around us. It's a great time to reflect on that. Listen, we're going to talk a lot about MDOT as we get toward the end of the show, but we're going to reflect a little bit about your leadership and where you came from. But you were saying something to me before we started the show about just how many roads and highways and bridges MDOT is responsible for, and give that metric that you described to me before we started the show.
We, the taxpayers of Mississippi, have an investment of $65 billion worth of infrastructure around the state. And if you took all of the lane miles that we're responsible for and laid them end to end, you could go completely around the planet once and still have enough roadway to build a highway from Jackson, Mississippi to Honolulu, Hawaii. So
wow,
we have quite a bit of responsibility, and that's before you get into the $6 billion list of identified needs and enhancements that are needed around the state to add to that. So
yeah, a lot of people actually think. A lot of people think that when the infrastructure, the $1 trillion plus infrastructure bill was passed, that was immediately going to address all of our needs. And boy, that couldn't be further from the truth. And we'll explain why that is here in just a minute. But for now, what I want to do, I want to shift gears. Brad, talk about where you grew up.
I grew up in a little community called Jupiter, Mississippi. It's about 3 miles outside of Delo. So you're kind of out in the woods when you're a suburb of Delo. But local church there was the center focus of the community. It was a community my great-great-grandparents moved to and lived in. My great-grandfather grew up there, my grandparents, my mother. And that was pretty normal for all the families there that went back generations. So in a lot of ways, that community was like other small communities around the state. Everybody there, whether you were related or not, you were still like a big family because you had shared one another's ups and downs and hardships and triumphs and all of that. So it was a really good place to grow up and to just to live and to run and rip and be a young boy, you know, in the country where you could go down on the creek and do all the kind of things that, you know, sometimes I feel for my nieces and nephews that are a little closer into the city. So it was a good place to grow up and a good place to be influenced by folks that taught Sunday school and just a lot of good memories from that.
Did you hunt and fish?
I did. Yeah. We grew up doing that. Of course, we had hunting dogs. So I never had the patience to sit in a deer stand like you. I think I would probably enjoy it more now, but growing up, I didn't like to be still. So we had dogs that we would turn loose and run the deer by us, you know, so it was kind of a lazy man sport in a way. But we grew up enjoying ourselves doing that, squirrel hunting, rabbit, a little bit of everything. So.
Yeah, I didn't like to sit still either. In fact, in 5th grade in the school newspaper, one of my teachers wrote in the school newspaper that Ricky Matthews is Mr. Fidgets. So I'm positive that I had attention deficit disorder. I'm positive.
I think I did too.
And I learned it, you know, as an adult to sort of bring it all into focus. But it's interesting that characteristic in me, though, made me, I think, a better CEO because over the years, it gave me the ability to move from one topic to the next pretty rapidly and be able to compartmentalize and all the things that you do. But yeah, an interesting time for me for sure. My grandfather used to tell me, Bubba, you're not going to catch anything if you don't leave the hook in the water. How many times did he tell you that? Huh?
I heard that quite a bit.
You know, I have on my show, SuperTalk Outdoors, you know, we talk about this part of the conversation all the time, that this heritage in Mississippi and the way, you know, this love of the outdoors, and that it's not about the catching the fish or shooting the deer. It's really about this incredible opportunity to get out into the outdoors and find yourself. And we learn it from, you know, a lot of people learn it from their fathers and their grandfathers, some from their mothers and grandmothers. Some don't get it till a little bit later in age, I've said on my show before. But when they get it, then they start to pass it down to their kids and their kids' kids. But that's a wonderful part of Mississippi's heritage, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's a part of our culture, you know, is enjoying, you know, all of God's beauty and nature and some of the best times that I remember having with my grandfathers were spent hunting and fishing and doing things like that. And just like you said, I don't remember what we caught or what we may have been able to harvest, but I do remember our conversations and the visits, and a lot of the stories that I have now are from small instances like that, you know. Yeah,
it was interesting the way you talked about the influence that growing up in your church, which was the center of your community when you were growing up, the opportunity to learn from elders, you know, the process of the structure of, you know, learning about morality and ethics and all the things that you learn. To say, you know, outdoors is kind of like that too, that you said you remember the conversation, you don't necessarily remember the fish. But it is a great opportunity to be able to go out and learn about life. And I say about my sons all the time, and we're offshore in the boat, you know, when we go offshore, we might be in the boat 8 or 10 hours together. And that's been, their whole life has been like that, where they can't get to the TV because we don't, you know, even if they had smartphones during those days, there's no Wi-Fi offshore. Well, actually, there used to not be. There is now, unfortunately. But the fact is, you know, this time that you get together and you learn about staying safe, you learn about, you know, especially when you're hunting or fishing offshore, you make one mistake and it could be your last mistake. And teaching that at an early age, it teaches you learn a lot, don't you, when you're in the woods?
There's a level of responsibility that you learn and trust of one another. And it was
well, you know, it's interesting because I can hear you have a big family, a lot of influence from lots of different people, very active in your church. I note that you're still incredibly active in the First Baptist Church that you're a member of today. What's interesting is I bet it's hard for you to zero in on who was the most influential in your life as you were growing up. But if you had to say, who would it be?
There were a lot of people. I think my two grandfathers were big influences, more so than what I thought. it seems like the older I get, the more I see aspects of their personality and things that come out in me, that maybe I didn't realize before, because they were very larger than life, in control. You understood that they were the head of the family, sort of thing. And my mother's father was very active in our church and was deacon there and was a leader there. And it just, looking back, I learned a lot about leadership and just being a man from them in ways that I don't think I realized at the time.
If you would have asked me the same question, I would have actually also said, I got a lot from my dad, but I got a lot from my grandfathers. My God, I spent so much time with them. And I wish I could see them today. I'm sure they're my guardian angels looking over my shoulder and they're proud. But the reality is they did influence me greatly. Hey, we're having a conversation with the executive director for the Mississippi Department of Transportation, Brad White. We're really kind of getting the story behind the man. When we come back after this break, we'll just continue the conversation. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Brad White, the executive director for MDOT, with me today. And we're going to talk a little bit about MDOT in a second, but we're really wanting to understand a little bit more about Brad, getting to know him better. And it is interesting to see that you growing up in a small community, being active in your church, spending time in the outdoors, having a big family, all these influences. And it's great to hear that your grandfather's had a big impact on you as you were growing up. And I think, I certainly said that as well, but probably a lot of people say the same thing. Sure. It's when you have the opportunity to have access to the real mentors, those with wisdom in your family, it has a way of having a great impact, especially in your case with one of them being a deacon in your church. And again, I see that you have continued to be very active in your church and that you have continued to take leadership roles in much the same way they had leadership roles. So that's all interesting to see. Was education always important to you early in your life?
I don't think I was a particularly good student, to be perfectly honest with you. We had mentioned this earlier. I think I probably had some type of attention deficit disorder. I didn't stay in my seat a lot. Subjects that I was interested in, like history and things like that, I excelled in. And those that I didn't care for, you could tell it in my grades, But yeah, it was important. It was the one thing. I had to drop out of college my senior year and go to work. And I was always kind of embarrassed by that. And I would kind of, it was the only thing in my life I'd ever quit. And I actually came to work at MDOT for Commissioner Dick Hall then as his assistant when Governor Fordyce had appointed him commissioner. And he really pushed me to go back to school. So I went back to Belhaven at night, worked at MDOT during the day and went to Belhaven at night, completed my degree in business management. And it's one of those things that I'm proud of because it had been the one thing that I quit and went back and started over.
Well, I mean, that's interesting because, I can relate to everything you just said. But some of us, we discover ourselves a little later in life, and we have these mentors that, like Dick Hall was for you, that can help kind of set the course. And once you set that course, there was no looking back. It did actually create sort of a foundation for you to really begin to say, okay, I get this, and I've got a real opportunity now to pursue the things I love in my life. Yeah, that must have been some great advice he gave you.
Yeah, well, politics was always, our family was very political and local politics in Simpson County. And my great uncle had a college roommate who was very close to our whole family, and he managed the funeral home actually in Simpson County, and he was a Republican. And he was a Republican mayor back in the late 50s and the 70s. So he was a Republican when there were very few around the state. And Mr. Ray Layton was his name. And he's actually who plugged me into politics and got me involved at a very young age when I was 14. He and his wife never had any children. And so he kind of took me under his wing, was very good to me. And that's how I got started in politics, specifically Republican Party politics, was all because of Ray Layton and the friendship that he had forged with Kirk Fordyce back in the 60s when they both were active in Republican Party politics.
And when you look back at it, did you ever in your wildest imagination think that you would go on the rides you went on?
No, I didn't. I've been very blessed. I think I'm proof that the Lord takes care of fools and babies. When I look backwards, there's no way that 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 anybody could say that I've been able to do the things that I've been able to do without the hand of providence guiding that. And I've been very blessed to get to have the opportunities that I've had, and to be able to work for the people that I've been able to work for were just phenomenal, chances that I've been given in my life.
Yeah, we're going to break all this down, but that you had such a long run as a chief of staff, and that you got to work for so many different incredible leaders along the way. Man, that's a great perch to see the way the system works, isn't it?
It is. And you're really, the chief of staff is just there to facilitate things. And every place that I served as a chief of staff, we had a staff of people that were far more talented than me and knew their area and their portfolio of policy items far better than I did. And all I had to do was kind of get out of the way, but make sure that everything was connecting together and just moving along. So being chief of staff is not a bad gig to have when you've got a lot of good people around you. And I was fortunate to always have that.
But what's inherent in what you just said are factors that are characteristics that are part of being a good leader. One is humility. I always said that I'm going to put my strengths and my weaknesses out on the table. The day that my weaknesses overshadow my strengths, then I'm going to go find something else to do. But I'm not going to fake it. What you see with me is what you're going to get. And it seems like you're very clear on, number one, understanding there's no way you can ever know what there is to know about all the pieces. You got to have great people that work for you that understand those parts and pieces. The other is you have to have great ability to sort of pass the power to them. In other words, delegate and understand what that's all about. But be able to see the big picture and be able to understand how all the pieces fit together and envision that and then work with some key people. Like, for example, I guess your first chief of staff job was with the Mississippi Department of Audit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, State Pickering was auditor at the time. And that was my first chance to be a chief. We had about 130 employees, all professionals, all people that knew their job very well. He had people like David Huggins that was running the investigations, and David had been Commissioner of Public Safety, Chief of the Highway Patrol. Pat Dendy ran our finance and compliance, and Pat had been with the Department of Audit for 30 years and was had written a manual on how local government was supposed to function in a legal way. So again, I was able to learn by the people around me, and just have really good folks that knew their job.
Well, how old were you then?
That was after I was state party chairman. So I was 31 when I became party chairman, and my term ended in 11, and I went there in 12. So I was.
So you were a young guy with a lot of older experienced people.
Late 30s, yeah.
Yeah. Great opportunity to learn, but I would think that the move to work with Senator Thad Cochran was monumentally important to you.
Yeah, I left audit to become his state director, and so we managed all of his state offices, Gulfport, Jackson, and Oxford, and dealt primarily with casework, all the people that needed help with things from Veteran Affairs to Social Security to fill in the blank. And Senator Cochran was very interested in that. He stayed up to speed on the needs of people. It wasn't just the things going on in Congress. He wanted to know what was happening with the people around Mississippi and who was having trouble navigating the federal bureaucracy. And then I left and had the opportunity to move to Washington, and he promoted me from state director to be his chief of staff and was able to work side by side. And I remember having I guess you would say kind of an arrogant view when I went up there. I had this thought that I said, I sure wish I was able to do this, 20 years ago, whenever he was in his prime and able to teach me, so much. And that was I was so wrong in that, because I learned more from Senator Cochran in the time that I was there, and I was his chief of staff until he retired, than anybody else. I mean, he was one time where Mississippi got it right in electing a person.
the ultimate statesman. And I had such a great relationship with him when I was a publisher of the Sun Herald. Did you ever attend any of the editorial boards with us when he would visit us on the coast?
I didn't go to that. Our comms people normally attended those type of things with him.
Yeah.
But he was phenomenal. Like we were talking earlier, Thad knew how to say the most with the least amount of words of anybody that I knew. And his credibility within the Congress was just matched by nobody. I mean, everybody respected him. Everybody liked him. And you were talking about Hurricane Katrina. Again, the hand of Providence was very good to Mississippi because we had the best lobbyists in the state as our governor at a time that we needed somebody going to Washington. And then you had Thad Cochran chairing appropriations. And together, he and Governor Barber, along with the help of Senator Lott and others, really delivered for Mississippi and helped us rebuild from that.
Yeah, it was interesting. The one thing about Haley's book, America's Great Storm, that I had the honor of writing the foreword to, is that the part that talked about what was happening on the ground here with the governor's commission and all the work that we were doing to create all this information that was being piled into what our ask was going to be. Louisiana had just asked for $250 billion. It created this big chilling effect in Washington. And Haley took a much more coordinated, thoughtful approach to saying, well, look, when we ask, we're going to ask for what we need, and we're not going to ask for a dime more. But what he talked about in his book about what played out in Washington, while the stuff on the ground that we are all aware of, I got such a great view into something I knew it was happening, at a very high level. I had no idea how many times he went to Washington, the work that he was doing bipartisan, the role that Barney Frank played. I mean, the whole thing, man, the magic, we may never see that again, where that many important players in a bipartisan way came to the help of a community like coastal Mississippi and Mississippi, for that matter, like it happened then. It's incredible. We'll continue that part of the conversation and then shift on to your work with Haley Barber and others along the way. So we'll see you after this break with Brad White, the executive director for MDOT. See you. Welcome back to Coast Vue. I have Brad White, the executive director for MDOT, and we're kind of telling his story. And when we went to break, we're talking about this alignment in local, state, and federal leaders, and in a bipartisan way, to align everyone around the needs of Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina. But the role that Haley Barber played in that is undeniable in every respect. I was in many meetings with President Bush and Haley Barber, and he was deferential, et cetera, et cetera. But man, anytime you were in a room with Haley, he was the smartest guy in the room. And we kind of sped past your role in the Republican Party, but I should give you an opportunity to talk about your work with Haley during that time, and then how significant his role was after Hurricane Katrina.
Well, this was after Katrina, when the party in 2008 was going to reorganize with our local convention, state convention, national convention, and Governor Barber approached me about running for state chairman. And it was the best way to run for something, because when he asked you to do that and his support was known, I was able to run unopposed. So it was an easy process. But I really credit him giving me that opportunity with propping me up to have the chance to do everything else that I did after that. All the chief of staff roles that I was given, my job here at MDOT, I really think had it not been for Governor Barber giving me that opportunity to serve him and the state and the role as state party chairman at a time that our party was, I think, strengthening our grip on state politics. I just can't overstate the value that was on my career overall. And being able to learn from somebody whose resume will tell you that he should be the most partisan person in the state, but he, aside from Senator Cochran, I never was around anybody other than Thad that knew how to build relationships and work across the aisle and build coalitions to get things done. He cared about results, and he didn't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. And he, I was in my early 30s, 31, when I was elected state party chairman. So it was an influential time in my life to be around him. And he had a phenomenal staff of people. that served the state well. And so to be a part of that team for those 4 years, it meant a lot to me, and I owe him a lot for that.
You look at the, you mentioned that the staff, the number of young people that he mentored and where they are today. I mean, some in the private sector doing extraordinarily well, some still in the public sector, but my goodness, did he have a way of attracting talent toward him?
When you may remember when he was first elected, he brought his policy team, basically were young Mississippians that were about my age, so they would have been in their late 20s in that 04 year, that he brought back from Washington. Marie Sanderson, who's on the coast now, that had worked with Senator Cochran. Jim Perry had been in then Congressman Wicker's office, John Ronsville and Congressman Pickering's office. I mean, he brought talent that had been serving Mississippi in Washington back to Jackson, and then put them to work in the state capitol. And they were a very talented group and a very effective group of making things happen.
Yeah, I've really, as part of Coast Vue and this opportunity to do this show during, in my retirement, the opportunity to focus on people like Marie, the role that she played in the policy work that she did working with Haley Barbour, and then to see where she is today and the numerous different companies she's involved in. Right. Her and her husband, Brian, I guess still the executive director of Republican Governors Association, living right there in Ocean Springs and having these sort of nationally focused jobs. But Marie and the work that she's doing today, the work that she's doing today, I think will help define Middle America's role in helping get find the Republican Party again. As we search for that, some of the research that she's doing and the efforts she's involved in, but very entrepreneurial, political entrepreneur is the way I would describe her today. But she's just one example. Joe Cloyd. I mean, what Joe Cloyd did with his life after working closely with Haley Barbour. I mean, I could go on and on. It just
Jason Dean was on the staff. Jason ended up chairing the State Board of Education and went on to a lot of great things. I mean, there was just a lot of really good people that were pragmatic in their approach of making Mississippi a better place. And so
we'll never see
politics, not just to win elections, but to make a positive difference. And every one of them did.
I think, I'll say we will never see, but I don't want to say it that way because, the future is long. But we should hope, we should covet, actually, the opportunity to have another leader like Haley Barbour.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, by the way, the word covet reminded me when he came to the editorial board for the Sun Herald. I'll never forget this. This has never happened before. We had this great editorial board meeting. At the very end, he says, look, I really appreciate the opportunity to be heard today. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity, but I want to make it very clear. I covet your endorsement. Nobody's ever said it quite like that. Yeah. Anyway, we definitely endorsed him, and not knowing at the time that Katrina would hit, and we would sort of redefine so much about what we understood about public and private, life. But so anyway, as you sort of speed through this, an opportunity to work with Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith and obviously working with Governor Tate Reeves. Those were some incredibly important years as well, weren't they?
Right. Senator Cochran retired. Senator Hyde-Smith was appointed, and she asked me to stay. And she was kind enough to keep most all of Senator Cochran's staff. Nobody lost their job, and was able to set up her office and talk about somebody with a genuine heart for the state of Mississippi, and someone that is authentic in every way. And so being able to be a part of her office when it was getting off the ground was a phenomenal opportunity. I knew I didn't want to stay in Washington, and when Governor Reeves was elected, he asked me to come back and run his transition, and that gave me the opportunity to move home, and I was very appreciative of that. But little did we know then that we were going to have COVID and all the other emergencies, that he had more declared emergencies in the first year that he was governor than I think had happened in the previous 2 or 3 governors. I mean, it was a rough and rowdy time for sure, but he led us through that in a very positive way. And again, it's where Providence just saw fit to have the right person in the governor's chair whenever we were going through those experiences.
What's interesting about those times for me is that you end up working as chief of staff for Governor Reeves during some very, very challenging times for our state. And to recall that you started the role that Dick Hall played early in your career working with MDOT, it's an amazing thing that it came back full circle again, because from the chief of staff role, here you find yourself leading MDOT. I bet you never in your wildest imagination thought that you would be in that chair.
No, and it's probably the only job that I would have left Governor Reeves' staff to take. I had very fond memories of the Department of Transportation as a young man working here. It was just fine people. We're talking about Katrina. A lot of people don't remember that it was MDOT crews with chainsaws and bulldozers and everything else that were clearing Highway 49, and behind them were the National Guard and the Highway Patrol and Marcia Barber.
Marcia Barber, right.
Came down, but it was MDOT that cleared the path to get all of the first responders and the necessary people down to the coast. So, I mean, you've got some of the most hardworking, seriously minded people that really shine during moments of disaster, ice storms and tornadoes. We've had people that have, lost limbs by working in work zones, being hit by motorists that were not watching what they were doing. We've had people that in an ice storm in North Mississippi that walked to work because he couldn't drive, in order to get on the equipment to go out and do what was necessary to help treat the roads. We've had people, one employee that delivered a baby on the side of the road that found a lady that was in distress. I mean, it's some of the finest people that you could ask are all collected together in this wonderful agency. And so when I had the opportunity to come back and serve as director, it was just an answered prayer for me to be given that chance.
Well, Brad, I've said this many times to people like you. And there aren't many like you. Obviously, everyone's going to be different. But if you think about the experience that you've gained, the opportunity to understand how many times, in fact, when you worked with Cindy or with Thad, did you have conversations about the role the federal government plays in building highways and bridges and how that process works and the relationship between the states, and you got to see best practices from around the country? You were in a great role to understand the intricacies of infrastructure, weren't you?
Yeah, I was very fortunate, especially with Senator Cochran, because of his role in chairing appropriations. We dealt a lot with the Federal Highway Administration and with the Department of Transportation and dealing with their funding and how they were funded. And because of my work at MDOT back years before with Commissioner Hall, I always paid closer attention, I guess, when that would come up, But no doubt, when I look back, I think that I was just very blessed to be given opportunities to gain perspective and build relationships that no doubt have helped me in this role that I have now.
There is no doubt that who we are today is the sum total of all these parts, and in your case, the parts really related well to the job that you're doing today and your humble servant role as a leader of MDOT. Anyway, when we come back, we're actually going to talk a little bit about MDOT in this final segment. We'll see you after this break with Brad White, the Executive Director for MDOT. We'll see you then shortly. Welcome back to Coast View. I'm having a terrific conversation with my friend Brad White, the Executive Director for MDOT. And Brad, I was actually going to read the goal of the Mississippi Department of Transportation, but I'm not going to do that. Actually, when you tell someone in a elevator what MDOT is, what do you say to them?
We take care of the core function of government that is our public transportation system. And,
listen, I'm at. Go ahead and finish.
I was just going to say, and we have about 2,600 employees across the state that get up every day to in some way form, take care of that $65 billion investment and then make plans for the future as well.
I met with a major planner up in Charlotte, North Carolina during my career, and he looked at a map of Mississippi, and the first thing he wanted to know is, do you have a port? And then the next thing he wanted to know is, do you have rail systems, and where are the highways? And the point that I was learning early in my career is the role that infrastructure plays in economic development. That cannot be overstated, can it?
No, I mean, if they can't get here, they're not coming. And so providing that opportunity and being thoughtful and deliberate in the way that we go about planning our transportation system. is something that's very important. We're having those conversations now with Governor Reeves. As you know, he's very interested in the economic development of our state, and being purposeful with how we invest our dollars to take care and to build opportunities, I think is critical and something that we need to be focused on doing.
I think one of the biggest changes coming for your agency, or they're twofold. One is, I think, Mississippi coming to grips with how many needs we actually have, roads and bridges and highways, and the challenges are associated with that with limited funding. And the fact that it's currently a special fund agency, which essentially means you have a limited fund that comes to you. And the significant portion of your budget is tied to gasoline tax, and with the world changing as it relates to that, there needs to be major changes in understanding what our infrastructure needs are and how we're going to fund them in the future. I bet you spend a lot of time talking about that.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, most all of our budget. We have a budget this year of $1.43 billion. About 1.2 is basically fuel tax, both federal and state. So it is very important, very vital. And the fuel tax has not been adjusted in Mississippi since 1987. But with the growth of electric and hybrid vehicles, with the federal government incentivizing that growth, with motor companies going to the production of electric vehicles more, what we have to begin now doing is having a conversation about how do we want to provide the reoccurring revenue needed to take care of this core function of government, because I do believe that the fuel tax will be unsustainable over time. Now, whether that's 20 years from now or 10 years from now or when, I don't know. But I do know that the conversation needs to start now so that we're prepared and ready to be able to continue making the investments needed to maintain the investment that the taxpayers already have.
Yeah, you almost can't wait to have that conversation, because it really needs to happen within the context of having the understanding of what the needs are. And the needs are really great, aren't they?
They are. The legislature about 20 years ago kind of amended the 87 four-lane program with a law that was titled Vision 21. And it's where they put a data-driven process into what the Transportation Commission has to do when they're identifying capacity needs around the state, where to add lanes, where to build bypasses, where to add these efficiency measures, if you would. That list represents about $6 billion worth of projects. And while we've got the biggest budget we've ever had, it's still a budget of $1.426 billion. And when you've got a $65 billion investment that you have to protect and rehabilitate and maintain, and then you've got a $6 billion list of needs, $1.426 billion doesn't go very far. So I think the men and women of the department do a good job in identifying and prioritizing that, working hand in glove with the Federal Highway Administration. But no doubt we could be doing more, you know.
And one last thing before we end, the 3 economic stimulus packages that came down gave the impression that over $1 trillion is going to be spent on roads and bridges, but it's an infrastructure package. By the time you break it all down, I think like $110 billion or some number like that actually is being allocated across the United States. It wasn't the infrastructure package we actually hoped for, was it?
No, the part of the IIJA that was important to MDOT and infrastructure was the portion that Senator Roger Wicker was the lead Republican on, and it was the reauthorization of the Federal Highway Administration and allowing them to do work. And they do that. Congress does that every 5 years. And so what we were expecting based on the previous authorization was at least about $2.5 billion over that 5-year period. And thanks to Senator Wicker's leadership, we were able to get authorized about $3.5 billion over a 5-year period. So we saw a net increase of about $1 billion over the next 5 years. And that has helped us to restart the capacity program and build projects like Highway 57 down in Jackson County that we just let to contract. It's going to be a $212 million project to add lanes and to help with that hurricane evacuation route. So better things are coming because of it, but it's still our needs outweigh the resources we have to address them.
The next time we talk, we'll talk more about specific projects, but this show has been about you, Brad, and it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you. Incidentally, for someone who drives to the Delta on a regular basis, I'm glad to see Highway 49 done. I have sped my trip up about 15 or 20 minutes, but it's been a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for your great leadership.
Opportunity.
You bet. You bet. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Good. Thank you.